Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for another edition of State of Affairs. Today we have the Minister of Education, the Honorable Diallo Riban. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Trevor, for inviting me on the show. I'm glad to be here. I'm always looking for an opportunity to talk about our education reform and answer any questions about, what people think about education today as we move forward.
Thank you, sir. We might as well just jump right in. You have a very serious portfolio. You've taken a lot of slack. Did you anticipate this position being so challenging?
I've always had a passion for education and, as we talked about earlier, workforce development. So that is why originally it was education and workforce development here. I anticipated this being very difficult. One thing about education that has been a reality to me is that, everyone has an individual story. We have about 4,400 students in our system. Every student has at least a one parent. And so everybody has a different story about their particular child and how their particular child should be treated within the system. And so it's a monumental task of, taking those comments from persons on the street because they want to talk specifically about their child. And also, but as the minister, I have to look at it from the perspective of what's best for overall. And sometimes that might not be what the parent wants to hear. And so I do sometimes take some slack there. What I think people also don't know is the Minister of Education is responsible for education of all schools, that's public and private, and setting policies as such moving forward. And so I do have a healthy relationship with all of our private schools as well and speak to them on a regular basis. And we tend to bounce ideas off each other as well. When I'm seeing something that's happening over in public school, I might reach out to one of the private school principals and ask, have they seen that? How do they deal with that? And it can go vice versa. Sometimes I will get my way to say, hey, we're having this issue. Is there anything that you guys have dealt with? But to answer your question very, very specifically, it is a difficult and very time-consuming post, but I wouldn't have wanted any other ministry if I had to do this all over again.
Thank you, Minister. We seem to be changing from eliminating the process of the middle schools and extending the elementary schools and going straight into the senior or the signature schools. But how's the process going with the middle schools elimination?
The process of phasing out middle schools started last year when we passed the legislation paving the way for signature programs within our senior schools. And so that part enabled us to do what is happening in September 2022, and that is the introduction of signature programs at the Barclay Institute and Cedar Bridge Academy. And the next phase of this is to we're looking to bring into fruition in September 2023 two parish primary schools and another signature school. Once the parish primary schools start to come to fruition, that's where you'll start to see the middle schools kind of start to phase out, and whether they're converted into senior schools or not, that's something that's still to be decided. We've always maintained that the process we're going through is going to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years, perhaps even longer, because we recognize and learn from the mistakes of the past. And so this is going to be a gradual system. It's not going to be one where you, as I've often said, you turn off the lights on Friday, you come in on Monday, and everything's completely different. It'll be a gradual movement. And so we'll see the current system, the new system, and parts of the new system operate concurrently as we go along, but eventually everything will just blend into one as we move forward. But the idea is to do it in such a way that causes as minimal disruption to our children. We've listened to the people who talk about what happened when the middle schools came in and the disruption that caused and the trauma. It's literally trauma when you're talking to, especially parents, because these people that came through the middle school system are parents that have children in the system now. And some of the questions I asked them was like, I remember when I was in school, I remember how stressful it was when we went through that change and the way we went through it. How can we not do that to my children? And so that's something that we have to take on board. And so it's going along as we anticipated. It hasn't been without hiccups. One of the things is change is not easy, and part of this is not just the change of the physical system, but the change of the thought process behind what happens within the ministry, the Department of Education, and within our educators in the school system. So a lot of the work that we do, they dwells into how do we teach differently, how do we approach this differently, how do we reach out to our children and say, what is it that we're doing that's working for you? What is it we're doing that's not working for you? How do we interact with parents? How do we interact with industry as well? Because all of these, education in Bermuda is something that we all have to take a part of. We all have to take a little bit of responsibility for. And so it's one of our main goals is to involve as many people as possible in the ideas as we move forward. And so we end up with what we like to say, a system that's for Bermuda, but designed by Bermuda.
What might be the latest with the West End primary school closure and the challenges with the Somerset school with the Somerset residents that are crying out for a rethink or a change? What's the latest on that?
The latest on that, the decision was made based on what I consider very sound principles, and I think it's very well, the West End, as they call it, West End Warriors. I still receive emails from them. I've received a lot of information from them as well, historical documents and such, which I didn't know even existed. What we have done is we have put together a historical legacy working group, and what they were charged with once we started doing this, the recognition that there is a storied history out there of not just West End, but all of our primary schools that may not exist anymore. You may be familiar with Howard Academy, the Technical Institute, Robert Crawford, St. George's Sec, Prospect School for Girls. You even have Devonshire Academy. You know, these are schools that don't exist anymore, but there is very little out there for anyone who wants to actually go and see what it is that they represented. So we put together this historical legacy working group that has come back with with terms of conditions or terms to say this is how we can go about recording that history, collecting that history, recording that history. We can give persons an opportunity to come and tell the story, and so that's where we're looking to move forward with. Is putting together an actual committee, and we'll be dealing with that very shortly. Dealing with a committee to come on board and actually work on how we can document not just the history of the schools now, but histories of the past. Put that in such a way that it can be displayed. Things like parish history. So up in Sands, which is the parish we were talking about, you may see things like monuments erected in the parish primary school, rooms named after storied educators. There might be renaming of schools, creation of historical artifacts that people can touch and feel, read about, and understand. These are some of the things that went through. The history of education in Bermuda is very rich. It's a really rich history, and it's steeped in Black person's history as well, because the public schools were erected primarily. If you read Dr. Christopher's book, you'll see that our public schools came into law because they were primarily for Black children to learn. There were a few that came, and back then we had the Portuguese. We had a real separation. We had Black children, our Portuguese children, and our white children. People don't fully understand that the integration, the removal of segregation in our schools only happened in 1971. That's not that long ago. All right. So when people talk about that, and I get it, because we're talking to people who went through that. They experienced that. They experienced that as children. They experienced that for their children. The types of person we're talking to, because they're elderly, they're up in age, and so they're still alive, and they know that, and they feel it, and they've lived that. And so that is why I get it when they come and say, this is what's happening, and this is how we feel about it. I totally get it, but we do have to look at this from a perspective of what is needed for our children today. Right, and so when we talk to the parents of our children within our schools, they just want good schools. They want their children they want to know that when they send them to school, they're going to have good teachers, they're going to have good facilities, and the children are going to have good outcomes from those schools. So we have to balance those two things together as we move forward.
You made mention of the St. George's Sacks, the Robert Crawford, the Girls High, the Technical Institute. All those schools produce excellent students, which are part of your ministry today.
Yeah.
We eliminated that. Why we can't get back to that type of curriculum?
Well, it's funny that you say that. When we talk about the signature programs, and some of our older people would recognize that, it's the idea is that our children attend our senior schools. First of all, they start at the primary school level, being introduced in what we call teaser programs, and they're able to be exposed to the different types of industry that Bermuda needs. And once we get that right at the primary school, then they'll develop a taste for that, or that's what we call them taster programs. And then they'll be able to say, you know something, I think I want to go into hospitality. I think I want to go into reinsurance or finance or health or education, or I want to be a scientist. I want to go into agriculture or climate control. I want to go into arts and culture. And I'm just throwing out the names of the various signature titles that we've come up with. And so they will now have the ability to go into senior school and spend up to 30% of their curriculum focusing on that signature. The 70% will still be the regular curriculum. So I think it helps to dispel the myth when people say signature school. They think, I'll go to a sports management school and all I'll do is play football all day. That's not what's going to happen. You still have to graduate from high school, and that process will still be in there. But along with that graduation from high school, you will have an opportunity to be exposed to that signature, to the level of when you do finish in high school, you not only have your high school diploma, you'll also have experiences in that signature. You'll have done work in that signature. You'll be able to have, for example, City and Guild certifications in that signature. You might be doing introductory courses at the Reinsurance Institute in Bermuda in that industry. You'll have exposure to persons who work in that industry, internships, apprenticeships, things like that. And so when you finish high school, not only will you have your high school diploma, you'll have some experience.
But for people of color, especially men in particular, not everyone is adapted to sitting in an office, doing insurance or reinsurance. We are good at our hands. So we got metalwork, mechanics, woodwork, construction, electrician. Why not bring in some of these that made us who we are back into the curriculum?
And there is. When we talk about our signatures, one of them is trades and business, which will cover everything that you've said. And the other one, the ones that are opening up in this September are trades and business and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. That'll be at Cedar Bridge Academy. At Barclay will be health services and finance and reinsurance. And so how we develop these signature titles is we did what we called the Future World of Works. And that was a massive undertaking of talking with not just educators and parents and students, but talking with industry. Everyone from the C-suite executive down on Pittsburgh Road to the one-man entrepreneur plumber, right, driving around his truck doing work, to say, what is it our children need to know in order to be successful in your career? And so that information was pulled back. We also looked at it to say, what is it that Bermuda as an island will need in terms of a workforce over the next 5 to 10 years? And so that was pulled together, and that data was then compiled and came out and said, here are the 10 signatures that we want to focus on, because these will, if children go into these, there's a reasonable understanding that they will get the experience to be successful in employment in Bermuda, because this is what Bermuda needs.
What are the 10?
What's that?
What are the 10?
The 10 are, I should remember these off the top of my head, is, as I said, STEM, trades and professions, finance and insurance services, health and social care, hospitality and tourism, education services, arts and culture, sports and leisure management, climate, environment, agriculture and resources, and community and social investment. Those are the 10 overarching. So when we say that, and I had this conversation, Trevor, with someone here recently. When we said hospitality and tourism, they automatically think of the busboy. They automatically think of a waiter. But hospitality and tourism covers a whole lot. We have perhaps running and owning a bar, being a manager, being a maitre d', operating an Airbnb. There's other thing there. So when we talk about those terms, we also want people to expand their minds and not think of those traditional types of jobs that used to be in there, because as I said, we've asked what is the future, and the idea of these is we also consistently do on a regular basis what we call horizon scanning, meaning we go back out and say, okay, what's coming in 5 years? Because what we don't want our children to do is finish school, with experiences in something that has gone by because the next thing has come out.
But you do know that to enter the entry level is at the lower end, and you work your way up. That's how it used to be. So
Well,
you're looking to change the narrative.
remember that's how it used to be. But our children are so much smarter. And I was explaining this to someone the other day who is they're in their 50s, and they got an iPad, and their granddaughter is 2, and can use the iPad
Yeah.
so much better than they can. And I said the reason is because they're learning this for the first time. With you need to unlearn what you know so you can learn it, and that's much more difficult.
It is what it is. I've got a couple of children that show me.
If you put that in place early on and get them to understand that this is the way, this is how you can, they will be much more successful.
Changing the mindset.
And so that's why we have to, and so that's where changing the way we approach teaching children is that's so much important. We have to give our children the opportunity to be creative thinkers and to be critical thinkers. And that doesn't always come from us wanting to impart what we know. What we know is experience, but your experience in a situation, my experience in the same situation are totally different. What we want to give our children exposure to is all of our experiences. So then they can then say, which one of these experiences is the route I want to go? That makes them critical thinkers. But if we're only saying, when this happens to me, do this. When this happens to me, do this. This happens to me, do this. They will start to rebel. They'll start to say, well, I just don't feel right for me. And they kind of don't get it, or they might not understand why. So this is why we have to dig deep and give our children all possibilities and let them decide which is the path that really suits them.
Good stuff. TNN understands that you're considering using TM Tatum as a signature school. Is that factual?
Okay. When we did our parish primary school consultation, we always said that we would have the idea is to bring to get a team together to look at all of our school buildings and that's going to help us plot the pathway forward. You heard me when I said earlier, we're talking about 3 to 5 years or maybe even more. We have to plot that path of 3 and 5 years. We can't kind of just do something here and then say, okay, we'll finish this, let's do something there. We have to figure out how that path is going to go. And since the team was on island examining all of our school buildings, I specifically asked for TM Tatum to be looked at as a possibility. What I want people to know is nothing is off the table when it comes to creating where our senior.
Is that a yes or no?
Where our new senior schools will be.
Signature school. Is that a yes or no?
What I'm waiting for is the report to come back. If the report comes back and says this is a great place, then of course it's going to have to be a consideration.
So my question for that is, my next question, and falls right in line, if it wasn't suitable for the middle school because of mill, why utilize it for a signature school? And the mill problem is still there.
Let me clarify that situation there, right? TM Tatum was operating perfectly as a middle school. There was an issue in 2 rooms, and I'm going by memory, in 2 rooms, and there was a roof leak in the library. The 2 rooms were currently under were under, the work they needed to do. That was actually taking place at the time the school closed, and the roof leak was supposed to be addressed. The staff and PTA presented us with a letter quoting and the Safety and Health Act is very specific on this. And we actually had that conversation. I said, guys, this is not the way to go. This is going to be very difficult because what it does state is the clause that they invoked was that we have to immediately close the building down, find places for everyone else to go, and remediate and fix every single thing that's wrong. So there were things, so once we sent the crew in to look at that, there were things that had nothing to do with the issues. But because of the way it happened, we had to fix every single one of those. And so when we got the report back, it said it would take, I believe it was just over $1 million to do everything, and it would take around 11 to 12 months. By that time, students had settled in to where they were, and we took a look at it, and we looked at the numbers, and the numbers said we can operate without having that building reopened. That's the only reason TM Tatum closed. If we did not get that letter, TM Tatum will probably be still open as a middle school today.
Did the issue get fixed?
There was no need to. because we didn't use the school as a we didn't use the building as a school anymore.
If the answer comes in yes for a signature school, that means it's got to be still fixed.
We would go in and make those repairs, and who knows, we might only need part of the building. But that's the type of stuff we're waiting for the report. So I don't want to speak in advance of the report that we've asked to be done on all of our schools. It could, because remember, we now have, Trevor, we have around 320, 340 senior school students, S1 students every year, about that number. Mm-hmm. If you take that and divide it by 5, right? If we had 5 actual senior schools, you take that number divided by 5, you're looking at around 60 students per school, depending on, the various, there might be more that want to do one signature than another. Mm-hmm. Don't need a very big school for 60 60 students times the 5 years. So that's 300 students, because they'll go S1 and then they'll become S2s and the like. And so we don't necessarily need a very large school for 300 odd students.
Let's go back to the middle school. There's middle schools, there's elementary schools that's going to be closed. What's going to happen with those buildings once you transition the students out and the facilities are still there? What's going to happen with
That's a good question,
facilities?
and we brought that up during the consultation.
So you got a field, you got a buildings, you got...
Right, and we brought that up during consultation and to ask people, what do you think? And so there were plenty of ideas that came back, daycare centers, adult centers, community centers for the parish, so all sorts of things come up. Who knows? There may be opportunities for some of them to be retained in education, as we use them as sub sites for training and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of things that can become of them. I want people to also know that all of our buildings belong to Public Works, and so we would have to, once we stop using, like Teen Tatum, we stopped using it. And so they started renting it out. It's being rented out on a month-to-month basis, and it's always been done until we make a final decision on whether we do or don't want to be up there. But there are all sorts of possibilities with their schools. Selling them could be one option to make some more money to put back into the public school system. Utilizing them for, like I said, there are all sorts of things. But
we do need an emergency housing development for our homeless.
That could be something as
you
well.
Got a structure that can either possibly look at that. You think?
But also remember, we're only looking to close 8 of them. 10 of the campuses are planning to be used for something.
Okay. Good stuff. Where we going next? We're gonna go with.
The hard questions?
The public perception that you're looking to be the longest serving education minister in the history of any government. Can you elaborate on that? You heard that before, yes?
I've heard that before, and that comes from a statement.
You said you've been here for 5 years. Has there been any minister that's been longer than 5 years?
Yes, there have been more. I think the longest serving minister is around 8 years.
Who was that?
That would be Gerald Simons.
Okay.
Gerald Simons was around 8 years, and then next to that is between 6 and 7, but that was back in the 70s, I think.
Miss Gloria McPhee.
No. Gloria McPhee wasn't
That
actually.
long?
She was only a couple. She was like 2 years. 2 years. Wow. Most. And it's interesting you mention that because I've been to conferences, and the average tenure of education minister in the OCED is around 2 years. It's just under 2 years. But getting back to what you said, that comes from something that I won't say it was taken out of context, because depending on how you interpret it. But we were having a debate in the House of Assembly, and the concept was, I will not, and the saying was, because it started with then Minister Keynes, I am on the wall and I will not come down until my job is done. And so that was juxtaposed into, he just wants to be the longest minister. Whether I'm the longest minister, whether I'm the shortest minister, the sole thing is to make a difference, and to make a difference in the lives of our children. At the end of the day, everything we do, everything we say, and everything that we want to do right has to be taken from the perspective of what is right for our children, what is going to put them on the pathway to success. What is going to get them to realize their dreams, even if they don't even realize what their dreams are. That's what we need to do, and that's what we need to put in place. So what I want to do is be remembered as someone who kept that as is guiding light to do everything that we want to do, everything that we will do, and everything that we have done, and we'll put that in place. When we talk about things like the Education Authority, that is something that I truly want to have up and running, because that will remove some of the perceived political interference within education. We will sit the running of education in a authority that is at arm's length from government.
So that removes the education ministry.
No, it does not remove the education ministry. It does not move the education ministry, because education, even though we have an authority, it will have to be paid for by government. There is no way that education in Bermuda can generate $134 million per year. There's no way, unless we all go private and everybody pays for it. But we just can't do that. And so there has to be a responsibility to government for those funds, along with some other key things. And so when you look at an operation like the Bermuda College that operates autonomously from government, however, it falls under the Ministry of Education. I meet with them on a quarterly basis with the chairman of the board and with the president. We discuss the things that the college wants to do, and there are still some things that must have the minister to sign off on before they can do. Not a lot. Most of the time they're just operating on their own, doing their thing, and but we have a very good relationship. I have a very good relationship with the Bermuda College, and I anticipate having minister, whoever comes and sits in the seat behind me, having a good relationship with the Education Authority. Not to the point where it's giving overarching policy directives, but it will be built in such a way that there is a level of oversight for the funds that are being spent, but the autonomy will lie not only in the authority but at the school level itself. That's what we're trying to get to. We want our schools to be the responsibility of the principals and their communities, because that's what builds great schools. Giving persons that are on the ground every day the opportunity to make those critical decisions on how those schools operate and how they do best. That's what works, and that's what all the research that we've done points to that. And so when we're talking about the Education Authority, we're talking about an authority that sits at arm's length from government. The Department of Education then moves over to there to operate under that authority. Our union agreements will shift over to there to work under there. But these are some of the things that are still being looked at, and how we could make that transition. But underneath the Education Authority will sit school boards, and those boards the idea is those boards run the schools and have a level of autonomy that we've not seen within our school system, because we want our schools to be great, but we understand that everybody needs to be, as I said before, everybody is a part of this, part of solving these problems. Everybody needs to have their shoulder to the wheel, not just the minister, not just the commissioner, not just the principal. Everybody's got to be pushing in the right direction to get education right.
Are you getting any pushback to this possibility of the Education Authority?
The pushback comes, when people think about the Education Authority, their minds automatically go to the BTA, the Bermuda Tourism Authority, and how that came about. And you would have heard me say during the budget debate, and I know that other media source quoted it. One of the only quotes they did was, when you're thinking of the Education Authority, stop thinking about the BTA.
Right.
Because it's apples and oranges comparison. We are not looking to go that route. Okay. This has to be done very strategically. This has to be done in the best light of all. As I said, we have to keep what our children's needs are first and foremost. So there will be some persons who don't agree. There will be some people who think, yes, this is the way to go. There will be people who kind of sit on the fence. Our idea is to do something where everybody can understand what it is that they're doing and what their role is to get us to where we need to be. But at the end of the day, everything that we do has to be about what's best for our students.
A question that just come to mind is that we're coming out of 2 years of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had on again, off again, learning via Zoom classes.
Yeah.
Do you think what's your thought on some of these children that's missed out on a lot?
That is a good question.
Let's say 2 years ago they were in P3, and now they're in P5, but they're still on that P4 level
I wouldn't say that they're all on the P4 level, but
Not all, but
but
some
I get,
have
but
missed the ball.
but I do
How
get, I
do
do
you
get
fix that?
I do get what you're saying. What we've put in place is interventions. Our students, starting this year, they've done a lot of testing at what they call pre-testing before you get to school, post-testing after you start the year. And so what they've done, well, what the department has done is compiled a lot of information of where our children should be versus where they are. And interventions are being put in place to suit that. Actually, later today we'll be talking about, on another program that I'm on, we'll be talking about the math interventions that have been put in place. And we've seen tremendous results from these math interventions. In some cases at the primary level, schools are twice as good, doing twice as good as what they were doing the previous year. And so those are the only way we can do that is we have to measure, see where they are, and put in interventions to get them to where we need them to be. This is you quoted primary, but this is not just primary as well. There's primary, middle, and senior.
That's right.
And so these things are being put in place for that. It was interesting that I was just talking. We had a meeting on Monday, and I was hearing that there's been a lot of requests for summer school this year. So those are the types of things that we're looking to put in place. When I say we, I mean the Department of Education.
Why is that? What's the reason for that?
For
Summer school.
in case people would just want to catch up to some of the things that they may have missed. The idea is to get your child to the level where they can pass at the bare minimum, but we want everyone to be above that. We would like for everyone to be past that. Not just the bare minimum to get by, but to actually know the work, understand it, and be able to decipher the work. And as I talked about earlier, be a critical thinker about the work. So those are the things when we talk about interventions coming in place. I do know that and along with this math intervention program we have something starting in, I believe it's in September, an intensive English literature intervention program that's being put in place as well. So there are some things being done. And this is the difficulty of education reform and people saying why it takes so long. And as I said, we want to do this with as minimal disruption. So we actually have to operate literally two systems at the same time as we move forward. But eventually one system will fade away and the other one will take precedence.
We spoke before we started the program on the length of time our senior high schools have been into practice. I didn't know that Cedar Bridge has been 25 or 29 years.
Yeah. I was telling you that Cedar Bridge celebrated I believe it was their 25th anniversary, like about 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't believe it as well, but I got invited to it.
And Berkeley. So I guess my question is kind of redundant, but you hear a lot of people saying that was the biggest mistake that any government could have made, was putting all these children into these two facilities. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on that is I've read those old reports. I've read through them, and that's what's kind of guided me to say, guys, we need to move slowly with this. There were several options that were actually on the table, and this was the option that they chose. I don't want to go back and second guess because I know how badly that is, because people second guess me all the time. And I know when you're making a decision based on the data that's in front of you, we would have to actually go back and talk and say that ELT team that was in place, that back then, what was the rationale for choosing option 1 over 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And at that point, back then, I am just assuming whatever evidence they had in front of them, whatever data they had in front of them said, this is the way we should be going, and they went that way. I think if hindsight is 2020, I want to say that there was not a very good idea. There was not a very good campaign of selling it, getting people to fully understand what it is, why we're going this way, what's going to be accomplished as we go this way, and some of the things that we're grappling with now. See, we have these S1s coming in this year under the signature program. So the S1 curriculum's developed. The S2, 3, 4, and eventually 5 is still under development. What I keep hearing from what happened back then was we did this transition, but the curriculum wasn't fully fleshed out. And so you kind of had people floundering around like, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? And that happened, that just carried on for years. So these are, when I talk about learning from mistakes of the past, these are the types of mistakes that we need to learn from the past. I think it's worthwhile mentioning that the middle school concept, I want to say, was overwhelmingly supported by our unions at that time as well. But and so for them to support it, it had to be something there that said this is the way, and so we can't, like I said, we can second guess now what was done back then, or we can say let's look at what was done back then, how it was done, how we can learn from that as we move forward. And I think I prefer to be on that side of it versus why you did this, why you did that.
I'm glad you said that, because now we can dovetail right into something that I saw happening 14, 15 years ago, and it's still happening today. What is the policy for our young man that's being expelled at these two senior schools, somewhere between the age of 14 and 16? What is the policy for that? Why are they being expelled?
Okay.
And for some of them, that is because they are gang related, or I know back 15 years ago, a certain individual, he was expelled because he was, quote unquote, stayed in the Pembroke area, the Middletown area, and he was expelled. What's the policy?
The policy is the only person that can expel a student from the system is the minister. That is the policy. And I in 5 years have not expelled not one student from this system. The problem we do have is we have in some cases our senior schools, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus with this, our senior schools will make it seem as if the child is not welcome at the school, and they will kind of just fade away. And it'll be put on as they just dropped out. And so it is very important to me, because it gets mentioned all the time about this expulsion thing. It's very important to me. It's very important to me that we clarify that, and we let parents know that the only way your child can be expelled from a school is if the minister writes a letter and says your child has been expelled. I've had a few referrals come to my desk, and I can say hand over heart that I have rejected every single one of them, and said there's some way that we can work with this young man. And in this case, two of them were young men. There's some way we can work with them, and we did. And they graduated from the Bermuda high school system, and I don't know where they've gone on to now, but they have graduated. But the recommendation was they should be expelled, and I've said no. So for that one, Trevor, it's a difficult one for me to really speak to, because I know there have been no one expelled under my tenure. But I do recognize that there have been children that have been made to feel like you need to go somewhere else, and they've gone somewhere else. We will work with our children as much as we can. We have alternative programs in place for persons who need that extra, support. We have alternative pathways to graduation for persons who just find themselves unable to, survive within, or actually produce. And so we have alternative pathways for them to achieve a graduation certificate rather than being in the classroom every day in that type of environment. So there are interventions that are there. There are things that schools have in place, or the department have in place to work with. We just need to know. And so that kind of puts us in an awkward place, because in my opinion, we should know. There should be records of these children. No one should be able to just drop out and disappear without someone saying, hey, why aren't you in school? What is it that you, why aren't you in school? What is going on? And so to speak to that, and we just had a conversation about this a few weeks ago, I've spoken to the Board of Education, because the Board of Education is an advisory body to the minister. And one of the criteria I gave them for this academic year is to look at truancy and look at how it operates now, and what it is that we can do to actually arrest that or challenge that in a more productive way.
I know when I'm in school, we had truant officers, and we knew who they were, and once we spotted them.
But here's the thing, we still have truancy officers.
We still have truancy officers. I'm getting ahead of myself, but before I get to that next question, I know for a fact there's a young man that he was, I'll put it this way, not welcome into the senior school, and he's now into an alternative facility now, and I'm not going to identify the facility either, but the practice that I see is still going on. These children are made to feel that they're not good enough, or they're not welcome at this school because of circumstances in which they live.
And that's the stuff we need to solve, because, part of this is a society problem.
So it seems like you're pushing them into the gang lifestyle.
Well, I wouldn't say that we're pushing them into the gang side, and I wouldn't
You're
support.
pushing them into the hands of the gang
I wouldn't support.
lifestyle.
I wouldn't support pushing them into the gang lifestyle. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn, and so there's a whole host of things that are happening here. But I'm going to concentrate on the education part of it, because when I say it's a society problem, we're talking about parents play a role in this, communities play a role in this, the police play a role in this. Their peers play a role in this, but on the education level, the Department of Education, we are always looking to work with our children and put the types of things in place to get them on the right path. I've had numerous calls where we've talked to parents would call and say, such and such is going on with my child. I'll make an email to the school and say, hey, I'd just like to know what's going on. And, they've come back and said, well, here's the things we're going to put in place to secure that. I'll put that child I'll just pin it on my calendar to say, check in 2 weeks, check every 2 weeks, see what's going on. And I've seen very good things come from our schools when they are given the opportunity. In some cases, it can be just a difference of opinion between a parent and a teacher. And that difference of opinion starts affecting the child. And so when I talked about us as adults need to remove our personal feelings aside when it comes to our children, those are the types of things that need to happen. Too many times the conflict or some of the disagreements we have are adult disagreements. The child doesn't care whether we do A or B, right? But it's us fighting each other. And so and I encourage all parents, because they'll call me, they'll send me a WhatsApp, they'll hit me up on Facebook or, whatever way they'll find me. And I was like, blah, 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 blah. They'll say something. I'll say, okay, let me talk to the school. The school will come like, rah, 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 and I'll say, okay, the best way to solve this problem is get all the players in the room. And so get everybody in the room. If you need me to come in and sit and listen, I'll do that as well. But we need them to talk. And what I found is once they start talking and actually talking and listening, they start working through some of the issues that they do have. And that makes it even better for the child to be able to be in that school. Some of our children do need intensive interventions. Some of them do. One of the signature schools that we want to develop is a school for alternative learning that will deal with children who need more intensive interventions in order to make them more productive. The idea, and as you would know, we have success academies now, which is actually working really good. So it's an opportunity for our unfortunately it's just males because we don't have one for females, but it's an opportunity for our male students who and in some cases through no fault of their own, through personal circumstances, through home life, through bad influences from peers and such, need to be out of that environment into an environment where instead of 18 children to one teacher, they're in a classroom that may have 4 children to one teacher. And they'll have behavioral therapists there, psychologists there, to kind of give them those tools to cope. And the idea is to, once you give them these interventions, put them back into the mainstream so they can continue on in where they would regularly be. Occasionally, some children never get to that point. So that particular program, Success Academy, has an opportunity for them to graduate with a diploma through that program if that's necessary. So there are things being put in place. It's not enough, in my opinion. We need to do more. We need to do more, but we recognize that, and that's when we're talking about the alternative school. But these things take time to develop.
It all sounds good on paper, but do you have the personnel that's going to help? Do you have these personnel to?
Well, as I said, with Success Academy, we're seeing phenomenal results. Dr. John Duncan and his team down there are doing a really brilliant job, especially with our middle and primary school, middle and senior school. And we have a Success Academy for primary that operates out of Heron Bay. And from my understanding, they're doing quite well. I'm not as familiar with that one. It's a newer one than the one Dr. Duncan runs. But we have, like I said, they have the personnel there, the therapists and these stuff, and they have people coming in to talk to these children. And so it is working. It's a model that just needs to be expanded. And we just need to, so part of our education reform is to utilize the funding we have better than what we've utilized it in the past. And so if we can utilize that better, we can have those sorts of interventions and expand those programs, because we're not, in our system, we now have, as if you talk about, we have 18 primary schools. Between 18 primary schools, some of our primary schools have as little as 53 children in the entire school, right? And so, it's not best operating with when you have classes of, and when you really think about it, if you're looking at a teacher that has 18 students gets paid the same as a teacher that has 5. Is that equitable? Is that truly equitable use of our resources? When we know that a maximum in a classroom should be 16, why can't we look at consolidating our resources, and instead of having 4 schools open with each one with classes under 16, having 2 schools open with two streams of 16, and now the funding that you were spending just to operate that building, operate all of those things, can be now put into those 2 schools. So the money you were spending on 4 schools is now being spent on 2 schools.
Who's monitoring the absentee children that have been, I'll say I know for a fact, because I'm speaking to a few teachers. You got a handful of children that in the last 2 years have been in school 6 or 7 times. Who monitors that?
The Power School, and it's interesting that the teachers say that, because schools are responsible for updating their attendance data daily. And so it's the schools that, and so we take it from the school. So what happens, the school inputs that data and it's monitored, and I actually get a report weekly because I wanted a report done on COVID to see what are the percentages as they go up and down based on COVID. So I get the report weekly, but, and unfortunately there are some cases where school hasn't reported data for that week, right? And so it's our schools that report the absentee data of a child not showing up, and that's where interventions can be put in place, because we did have, in some cases at the height of COVID, showed parents that even though schools were open, did not want to send their children to school because of COVID. And we don't have a system where you can optionally select whether you want to send your child to school or not.
Lastly, we're going to wind up.
Oh wow, it's been 45 minutes already?
Yes, sir. Minister, there seems to be a disconnect, a conflict between this labor government and the unions, all of the unions, as a matter of fact. Since we're talking to you as the education minister, what is the latest development between you and the BUT and the education ministry?
First of all, I don't think there's a disconnect. I think when you have a difference of opinion on how you should move forward on certain things.
It's a disconnect. It's a labor government.
People would call that a disconnect. Just because we're a labor government doesn't mean that we're always going to agree on how to move forward on certain things. Everything starts with a conversation and needs to begin with and end with a conversation. Everybody has to come willing to have open dialogue. And everyone needs to understand that because you suggest an idea doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be enacted. Because we suggest an idea doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be it's the best thing. And so we have to figure out how to have negotiations and conversations around disagreements that is not disagreeable. And so the relationship between the ministry and the department and the BUT is, I still held my termly meeting with them a few weeks ago. We discussed various matters. There is the issue of the president and her dismissal from the system. So that's still a lingering thing that's being looked at. They have asked for arbitration on that, and I believe that's going to Labor Office to be arbitrated. And so there should be no discussion on what's going on there.
I understand that.
We are also in the process of discussing the new CBA. So meetings have been happening here constantly over the new CBA. The Bermuda Union of Teachers have been participating in the education reform. Despite what appears to be a disconnect, as you said, they still participate in that, and they meet monthly with the Learning First team, and so we are at a point where we may be disagreeing on certain aspects on how to move forward. But I think at the end of the day, we all recognize that we need to figure out a way to get along for our children. There's there's an African proverb that says when two elephants fight, the grass suffers. In this case, the grass is our children. The longer we are disagreeing, the longer we are, quote unquote fighting, the, you know, our children will suffer. So we have to just figure out a way to get past that. And so we've had conversations, and like I said, I just had my termly meeting with them, and they've given some thought, some feedback that I've taken. I took copious notes, and I'm really ruminating on that, on how we can do things slightly differently as we move forward. And as I said, the negotiations seem to be going along at a good clip, as they even mentioned in the meeting we had that they were okay. They felt that things were moving along. The union had sent us 30 grievances. I think they were filing a grievance every couple, 3 or 4 every week since January. Those are being handled. They actually mentioned that in our meeting as well, that they were pleased with the way those were being looked at and moved along. And so it's going to take some time to repair the relationship. It's going to also take both parties having the ability to step back and say, we need to figure out how to get along for our children. And as I said, getting along doesn't always mean that what I say is what the only way to go, and what they say is the only way to go. We have to figure out how to get past that barrier and talk. And so I'm hopeful. As I said, met with them, took a bunch of notes, reflecting on some of the things. And all of our meetings are recorded, so I'm able to go back and look at the meeting and see the things that happened in there. And we'll just continue to work on the relationship.
Lastly, just yesterday, you've allowed the 2 senior schools to have
Yes.
sports. What is that going to look like? Are we going to have any rackets? Because ain't nobody been running for the last 2 years, so it doesn't look like no rackets are going to be broken.
I don't know.
What's it going to look like? You think is it worth it?
You still have some of those students that participated in Carifta.
Carifta, yeah, that's a handful. That's a handful.
A handful of them have participated in Carifta. But I look at it from this perspective, right? As we are moving towards normalcy and learning to live with COVID, especially within our school system, there's 2 senior schools approached me about having sports day. Although based on our guidelines, they don't qualify for sports day. I think it's important to point that out. I asked both of them to put together a plan on how it is that they could do sports safely. And both of them presented me with a plan that was really, really well written. And so I said, okay, let's go ahead.
And thought out.
What I plan to do as well is reach out to the middle schools and say, hey, none of you qualify, but the senior schools did it. And they presented a plan. Reach out to your colleagues, see what it is that they did to make their sport safe, to make it safe, and we can consider that. And perhaps we can have sports days with them. I attended both Barkley and Cedar Bridge yesterday. Barkley, I just got word. Greenhouse won. I didn't want to say it because I know it's a big thing. It's a big thing about that.
It's a 2-day event or 1 day?
2 day. Both of them were 2-day event. Barkley was Tuesday and Wednesday. Cedar Bridge was Wednesday and today. And so I visited, and Cedar Bridge was held at National Stadium, Flora Duffy National Stadium up there. And it was a pleasure, truly a pleasure to see our children out and enjoying the outdoors and running. And I will say, one of the things that was a plus that came out of this was there were a few students who don't normally participate in our regular screening program that were caught as positive. And so a positive thing came out of it. Well, not to play a pun on word, but a positive thing came out of this, because it was the reason the schools were not in 2B, as we talk about the categories 2A and 2B, is because neither of our senior schools or our middle schools have over 80% of our children participating, 80% of the children and staff participating in the screening program. And so what they came and said, we'll test everybody the day of, and we'll separate these people over here. Spectators can come, but they'll sit over here away from the children. And so they came with this very detailed plan, both schools. And so I was pleased to see that there were some children who don't normally test at all, were tested and were found to be positive. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because those students, if we didn't have sports, those students would be walking around the halls now, potentially infecting someone else. And so as we move towards normalcy, towards a level of normalcy and getting back to what our schools do, being in the classroom is always going to be the most important thing for me. But understanding that things like sports day, are critically important to the development of our
Testing
children
is
as
going to
well.
continue throughout the
Oh,
education
yes. Yeah,
system, yes?
the testing continues, how our system is. In our primary schools, we do saliva testing once a week, so all of them are over 80%. But in our senior schools and middle schools, it's a at-home antigen test, but it's on you to test and submit. Now I want one last word, is our annual Father's Day essay competition is on and popping. So I'm sure you got somebody that qualifies in there. It's for P6 and M1 students this year. I know nobody in that category.
That's outside of my remit.
Oh, you want either M?
That's right.
And so, but we've added something. We've added a wrinkle this year. As you heard me talk about earlier, meeting our children where they are. The wrinkle is, and perhaps even you guys can assist with them, is we are allowing them to submit video submissions.
Okay.
As well. So we're not only is there a category for essays, the traditional Father's Day essay, there's also a category for a video that says 1 to 2 minutes long, representing why my father should be Father of the Year.
Okay.
And so we have until May 26th to submit those. You can send any information to fathercontest@moed.bm. If anyone wants to inquire. We've sent it out to the schools. The schools have sent it out. They're supposed to send it out.
It's got 5 years, so I hope in 5 years' time, we'll just have the video presentation.
So the schools have sent that information out, but what we do want to make it crystal clear that this is not an additional project for schools. We want our children to work on this on their own. Schools can assist if that's what they want to do, but we don't. We know our teachers are burdened enough with just what they need to do. And so this is just an opportunity for a student in P6 and M1 to give a handwritten essay of why my father should be Father of the Year, or submit a video of why my father should be Father of the Year.
Minister, I want to thank you for joining us.
I want to thank you. I truly enjoyed.
Yes, sir. And let us close with, in conjunction with TNN and Crimson Multimedia. This has been State of Affairs, and thank you for joining us. And we do see you in our next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.